Crimea is about to fall, and Putin has abandoned Crimea to its fate. This was the crown jewel of Putin's strong Russia narrative, Europe's most fortified piece of land, laced with S-400s, packed with tens of thousands of soldiers, an untouchable fortress. But Russia never calculated that Crimea could one day become a fortress it couldn't feed. Today, inside that crown jewel, approximately 40,000 to 60,000 Russian soldiers and 2.5 million civilians are trapped. Vehicles without fuel, positions without resupply, units that cannot rotate. Ukraine did this without landing a single soldier, without dropping a single paratrooper, by ratcheting up pressure over years. And the result of this systematic siege began cracking in just 48 hours, with a single date at the center of that window: June 9th, 2026. South of Mykolaiv, where the Dnieper empties into the sea, there's a narrow strip of sand called the Kinburn Spit, treeless, bare, stretching into the sea like an exposed finger. Russia had held it since 2022, because that spit commands the shipping channel to Mykolaiv's port. As long as the Russians held it, Mykolaiv's port couldn't open. While Odessa breathed, Mykolaiv stayed choked. On June 8, 2026, that spit collapsed. The Ukrainian partisan network Untouchable, through an agent who had infiltrated Russia's own Dnipro Force Group headquarters, delivered the news. Russia's 337th Airborne Regiment was abandoning the shore. Ammunition, fuel, and food shipments had been cut. Part of the regiment had already been shifted to Zaporizhia. The remainder was left without personnel, and reinforcements never came, not even once. In RBC Ukraine's words, nearly all of them had already fled. And here's the point: Kinburn isn't a random position, it's Russia's westernmost salient on this front, the most exposed, most forward point. When a supply line collapses, the first to die is the end of the line. Kinburn was that end. Its fall is the first proof that the entire southern logistics chain has rotted. But the real breaking point came the next day. On June 9th, 2026, within the same 24 hours, Crimea's eastern gates collapsed one after another, and this time, two bridges at once. First, Chongar, initially struck on June 7th, 2026, and reduced to a single lane, it was shut down completely by the second wave on June 9th. Immediately after, on June 10th, 2026, the bridge from Henichesk to the Arabat Spit was also struck. Two bridges, 48 hours. The peninsula's two main eastern connections to the mainland destroyed. And this was no coincidence. It was a prediction coming true. Retired US General Ben Hodges had defined a single prescription for Crimea years ago. Don't occupy, isolate. First cut every road feeding the peninsula, then liberate. Eventually that bridge will come down, he'd said, but you don't even need to destroy it. Stopping the traffic is enough. June 9th, 2026 was the day Ukraine's months-long systematic siege, codenamed Logistics Lockdown, was validated on the ground. At one end, soldiers are fleeing. At the other end, two bridges are collapsing simultaneously. In the middle, in Crimea, approximately 50,000 soldiers are being slowly encircled, in a single day. And this time, there may be no going back. To understand why Putin is in such a difficult position, just look at Crimea's map. Because in this war, geography is not neutral. It chose a side, and that side is Ukraine. Crimea is a peninsula, but its connection to the mainland is surprisingly thin. In the west, the widest point connecting it to land is the Perekop Isthmus, and wide means just 9 kilometers. Most of its northern edge is a 120-kilometer stretch of shallow salt marshes along the Sea of Azov, a mud sea that no army can cross. The remaining gates are narrow and vulnerable. In the east, Chongar over Lake Sivash, actually two bridges side by side, and south of that, a dirt crossing from Henichesk to the Arabat Spit, built not for military convoys, but for adventurers. Then there's the Kerch Bridge. But note, that bridge doesn't feed the southern front, it connects directly to Russia, and fuel transport across it is already banned due to structural damage fears. The railway ferry? The last one, Slavyanin, was sent to the bottom by Ukrainian military intelligence in April 2026. The railway itself? During the same braking window, on June 8, 2026, the Moscow-Simferopol train was struck, the assistant driver was killed, and all train traffic on the peninsula stopped. The only railway link to the mainland is now the Kerch Bridge. So Crimea's links to the mainland aren't just few in number, they're structurally rotten. Each one narrow enough to be cut by a single drone focus, fragile as a single bridge pylon. When a military planner looks at this map, what they see is not a fortress. What they see is a few narrow doors waiting to be shut. Ukraine saw those doors and began closing them one by one. While bridges were falling, the real blow was landing elsewhere, on the main highway. And the one confirming it wasn't Ukraine, but Russia's own command. Remember why Chongar was so critical. Approximately 70% of all military and civilian traffic between the two sides flowed through that bridge, the shortest, best maintained, highest capacity route. When it was completely shut down on June 9, 2026, Andriy Kovalenko, head of Ukraine's counter-disinformation center, said it plainly. Chongar is destroyed. Russian officials are trying to hide the situation. Occupation Administrator Saldo claimed over 20 drones were intercepted, but was forced to admit that traffic had stopped and redirect drivers to Armyansk and Perekop, adding at least 2 extra hours to the journey. But the real admission came not at a bridge, but in a document. Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces commander Robert Brovdy, known as Madyar, displayed the paper in his hands on June 9, 2026. A Russian Vostok Force Group combat order dated June 6, 2026. The order is clear. Starting June 7, 2026, military cargo transport is banned on 2 roads. One is R280, Novorossiya, the main artery Putin had proudly built post-occupation, stretching from Rostov through Mariupol, Berdyansk, and Melitopol to Crimea. The other is A291, Tavrida, the peninsula's own internal backbone. The reason is written in the order's own lines: to prevent irrecoverable losses of personnel and motor vehicles. Pause for a moment and feel the weight of this. An army is banning its own main supply route from its own soldiers because that road is now a graveyard. This isn't Ukraine's claim, it's Russia's own signature. Brovdy's one-line commentary was sufficient, the official admission of their own helplessness. The numbers confirm this admission. In 2 weeks, daily truck traffic on that road dropped from 3,800 to 1,100. 71%. Drones turned specific sections into a death corridor through continuous surveillance. In May 2026 alone, over 125 trucks burned there. And the backup routes Russia has left don't replace R280. The alternatives via M17 to Perekop are secondary, narrow, poorly maintained paths. Dropping from a primary highway to a secondary road means every shipment slows down, every convoy hangs exposed in open terrain for longer, meaning an easier target for the next drone. So what does an army do when it loses its main road? Russia's answer shows what desperation looks like. In footage leaked to social media, military Ural trucks have been painted civilian colors, plates still military, drivers in civilian clothes but with army haircuts. The Dnipro command ordered fuel to be transported from Rostov to Crimea by soldiers disguised as civilians. In a video from Dagestan, local men are driving personal cars to Zaporizhia carrying fuel, with jerry cans in their trunks. This is no longer a logistics system, it's a survival effort run on gasoline poured into cans. And there's no side exit. The ferry is gone, the railway is gone. What remains is the Kerch Bridge's road lane, but that faces Russia, not the southern front. Fuel doesn't cross it, and it doesn't have the capacity to sustain a 50,000-strong garrison alone. Moreover, the problem isn't just getting in from outside. Since A291 Tavrida, the peninsula's own internal road, is also closed to military transport, even the small amount of material that enters Crimea can't be distributed inside. Ammunition sits in a depot, but can't reach the front. Fuel sits in a tanker, but can't reach the base. The siege isn't just at the gate, it's inside the peninsula too. To understand why this desperation is so dangerous, you only need to know a single number. A soldier at the front, with fuel, ammunition, water, food, and medical supplies, requires an average of 50 kilograms of resupply per day. For 50,000 soldiers, that's 2,500 tons per day, meaning every day, without interruption, a flow of hundreds of trucks. Before R280 was shut, 3,800 trucks per day passed through that road, and those trucks fed not just Crimea, but the entire southern front. Now the 1,100 trucks leaking through secondary roads must serve the same front. The slice of the pie going to Crimea gets thinner every day. The fuel equation is even more merciless. Since June 4, 2026, free gasoline sales have been banned in Crimea. Purchases are limited to 20 litres per person by ration coupon only, and even the coupons reportedly aren't enough. Yet a tank burns up to 8 litres per kilometre. Without fuel, an armoured vehicle can't move, and an armoured vehicle that can't move is just a stationary target. In Sevastopol's supermarkets, sugar, flour, grain and pasta are being pulled from shelves. Chains are imposing per-person purchase limits. For now, the cause is panic buying, but if supply continues to fall, the panic will soon become reality. And this hunger is already being felt on the ground. According to Brovdi's data, in just the first 6 days of June alone, Russian losses in Crimea and the southern front equaled an assault brigade, approximately 2,000 soldiers. The reinforcements needed to replace those losses must travel the same severed roads. The siege feeds itself. The more casualties, the more reinforcements needed. The more reinforcements needed, the more closed roads matter. This picture didn't form overnight. Behind it is a systematic campaign that even has a name: logistics lockdown. On May 27, 2026, Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov announced the program. Approximately $113 million in additional funding for mid-range drone procurement, distributed by performance scoring to the most effective brigades. Fedorov's formula in one sentence: the enemy will no longer feel safe even far behind the front. What made this possible was a quiet technological leap. Hitting targets accurately at 200–250 kilometers required artificial intelligence, drones that recognize and lock onto targets in the final phase of flight, self-guiding despite electronic warfare interference. That's precisely why this siege came in 2026, not 2023. The technology only matured now. The strategy unfolded in 3 phases. First, the Azov Brigade seized air control over the roads around Mariupol. Then, Special Operations established air dominance on the Melitopol-Chongar corridor and began hunting fuel tankers. Finally, bridges, the ferry and the railway were severed one by one. And the real intelligence here was in target selection. In 2023, Ukraine struck the Crimea bridge and hit a wall. Grand, spectacular, but a single blow. In 2026, it's not hitting the bridge, but every road leading to the bridge. Instead of one big explosion, a slow, continuous, sustainable strangulation. Less dramatic, but far more lethal. Now let's return to the beginning, to Putin's deadlock. Because there is no easy card on the table in front of him. A commander with a garrison he cannot feed has only 3 options. First, evacuate. But evacuating Crimea means the collapse of every narrative built since 2014. Putin's personal legacy, the peninsula etched into national identity, gone. For him, this is political suicide. Second, feed it. But as we just saw, roads are closed, the ferry is sunk, the railway is severed, the main highway is banned by his own order. Feeding is now nearly impossible. That leaves the third, darkest option. Keep the troops in place and let them slowly erode. And for now, the evidence suggests Putin is leaning toward the third. Because go back to Kinburn. While the 337th Regiment was collapsing from hunger, reinforcements were never sent. Not once. And as soldiers fled the shore, the only thing that came from Moscow was silence. Crimea isn't being officially abandoned, but effectively, with every reinforcement not sent, it's being abandoned a little more. And the difference between the two is increasingly just a matter of timing. This is why Kinburn isn't just a strip of sand. It's a signal of Putin's choice. When a commander leaves his soldiers at the furthest outpost without reinforcement, those soldiers feel the war's direction before anyone else. They felt it at Kinburn. The next question is when the 50,000 in Crimea will share that feeling. So what happens militarily from here? The answer to this question was drawn by Ben Hodges long before the events on the ground. And what's interesting is this. What Ukraine is doing today is almost exactly his prescription. This is precisely where Hodges' foresight converges with Ukraine's strategy. Hodges' thesis in one sentence: Crimea is this war's decisive terrain, and its liberation will come not through occupation, but through strangulation. His prescription has three simultaneous phases: isolate, make untenable, collapse economically. Ukraine's logistics lockdown is executing exactly this. The isolation phase has already been seen at the bridges and on R280. The second phase, making it untenable, is proceeding quietly but mercilessly. In the last 4 months, Ukraine's mid-range drones have destroyed over 500 Russian air defense units. The asymmetry is striking. Ukraine's drone costs roughly $250,000. The Russian system it destroys costs $15 million. Every encounter bleeds the Kremlin's budget a little more. So what's Ukraine's next physical move? The map shows it clearly. The Perekop Isthmus to the west. That isthmus is only 9 kilometers wide with no defensive depth. 2 narrow roads, Armyansk and Perekop, fitting into a single fire focus. If Ukraine applies the same fire control it used on R280, Crimea's last land gate closes and the peninsula truly becomes an island. The second target is the Kerch Bridge's railway capacity. If that too is permanently disabled, Crimea's heavy military resupply drops to near zero overnight. But honesty is required here. Ukraine's own command says this isn't a full blockade yet. Madyar Brovdi explicitly said, "A traffic collapse is not a blockade." But what he added was this: "This diet is precise and effective." The process isn't complete. The direction is clear, but not the destination. Hodges sees 3 trajectories from here. First, accelerated isolation. If the Kerch railway is permanently cut, heavy resupply collapses. Second, and the most likely according to Hodges, sustained compression. Even if the bridge stays standing, expanding drone coverage creates a slow-motion erosion. In his words, "The Russians in Crimea will gradually feel themselves being cut off, and that feeling destroys morale." Third, the nuclear card. Putin has brandished it for 4 years, but never played it, and every unplayed threat erodes its credibility a little more. And the trap Putin can't escape is right here. If he defends Crimea heavily, the front weakens. Indeed, he was forced to pull VDV units from Donetsk southward, and the Pokrovsk offensive partly stalled because of this. If he defends lightly, Ukraine's strikes accelerate. In Hodges' words, "Every ruble spent on bunkers in Sevastopol is a ruble that doesn't reach the Zaporizhia front." Every step he takes solves one problem while creating a new one. So does this mean Crimea will fall tomorrow? No. And ignoring the fact that Russia is still powerful, that it still holds serious cards, would be telling only half the story. The Kerch Bridge is still open. Personnel and light material can pass via the road lane. The independent Russian research group CIT speaks with balance. They don't believe that severing the connection alone will bring military collapse. They remind us that humanitarian supplies could be flown to Simferopol airport via IL-76 or AN-124 cargo aircraft. And the same group says the Russians are preparing a major offensive in Zaporizhia toward Orikhiv. If that offensive launches, the equation could change. Russia's capacity to resist shouldn't be underestimated either. In 2022, almost the same scenario played out in Kherson. Ukraine struck bridges, cut lines. But Russia held out for months, built pontoon bridges, managed with night convoys, and only withdrew in November 2022. Crimea's political weight is far greater than Kherson's. The Kremlin will set the withdrawal threshold much higher this time. Moreover, the peninsula is still armed. Kalibr and Iskander missile capacity remains, and as the military situation deteriorates, the Kremlin's nuclear rhetoric could harden. So Crimea is not about to fall, but holding it gets a little more expensive every day. The right question isn't, will Crimea fall? The right question is, how much longer can Russia sustain this peninsula under these conditions? Military history approaches this question with a single rule. To defeat an army, you don't have to kill it. Most of the time, cutting off its food is enough. Ukraine is cutting, and we know this from Russia's own documents, because the one who closed the main highway, who condemned soldiers to jerry-can cars, and who wrote irrecoverable losses as the justification was not Ukraine, but Russia's own command. Conquering a peninsula is hard, but turning it into an island and waiting, That is far more effective. All that remains is a 9-kilometer-wide isthmus, far too narrow to feed a peninsula, and to close a trap, not that wide at all. Putin barely spoke about Crimea this week, perhaps because he has nothing easy left to say. We'll continue watching this front. Subscribe to the channel for more. Thank you for watching.